said that expire date needs to be in GMT format, and thankfully JavaScript gives you a built-in routine called a toGMT string that formats it for you. So now let's save our file and switch over to our browser, reload the page, and see how it works. And now when we reload the page, because of what we had in our initialization routine, where we set that name field based on what was already in that cookie, my name stays in there even when we reload the page. Next up, now that we've written the cookie, let's make sure it's in there by reading it back out again and displaying it. Our last example covered both reading and writing cookies, but it was primarily about writing a cookie. So now we're going to cover reading a little bit more thoroughly. If you're following along with the exercise files, this is Chapter 9, Example 2, script.html. And once we've written the script, it's going to show the name that we just wrote out in the previous example. So here's our HTML file, and here's our JS file that we're about to write. When the window loads, it's going to call name field init, and here's our name field init function. I'm going to say if, and there's a skeleton for if document.cookie isn't equal to nothing. Just make sure that you really have written something out there. Then we're going to set document.get element by ID for name field dot inner HTML to hello, and then concatenate onto the end of that document.cookie.split on the equal sign the one element in the array, which is actually the second element because it's zero-based again, and that's all there is to that. So let's see it in action. I'm going to switch over to our browser. We've already got this page up. Let's reload it. And it knows my name. And it knows that because it got it out of the cookie. Again, the value of a cookie looks like this when you have a single cookie. There's a cookie name, which in this case is a username, cookie value, which in this case is Dory, expires equals, which is 6 months in the future, the path, which can be any path on a domain, we're just using / and the domain equals site domain. If you don't set that, it will automatically be your own domain. You may have noticed actually that it was written out in a different order. JavaScript and the web browsers don't care as long as it's something equals something. Whatever the cookie name is, that can vary because you're going to set different cookie names to the values, but the word expires, the word path, and the word domain all need to be just whatever they are. If you have multiple cookies, you'll have cookie name 1 is cookie value 1, and cookie name 2 is cookie value 2, and they can have different expiration dates, different paths, and different domain values, but the word expires, domain, and path are all stable. They don't change. So, in our previous example, we wrote a cookie, and now we have a completely different web page reading that cookie, saving the information so that we can read it up again later and do something with it. When working with JavaScript and cookies, it can be really handy to have a little snippet of JavaScript in your toolkit that will read all the cookies available to you and write out their names and their values. So we can create that. If you're following along in the exercise files, we're on Chapter 9, Example 3, script.html. And this is pretty much an empty page except for an H2 with an ID of cookie data because that's what JavaScript's going to fill in. So over in the JavaScript, we have our skeleton that on window.onload calls show cookies. And then here's our show cookies function. So we're going to set up a variable called outMessage. That's going to be the message that is displayed on the screen. And first we want to see, are there any cookies? So if document.cookie equals nothing, which means there are no cookies as we've seen, Then we set out message to be there are no cookies here. Else is the fun stuff. I'm going to set new variable var. This cookie is document.cookie.split. And it's a semicolon and space. We haven't seen this before. It's because we've only been dealing with a single cookie. As I was saying, if you have a single cookie, you can split on the equals, and you're going to get everything split up by cookie name and cookie value. But if you have multiple cookies, the first thing you need to do is split on semicolon space, and this will give you an array of all the individual cookies in different elements of this cookie array. So now we're going to loop through this cookie for var I equals 0, I less than this cookie dot length, I plus plus. So that was our loop to go through this cookie array from 0 to however many there are. And now we're going to set up out message. Plus equals concatenates onto the end of out message. So if there's 10 different cookies, we're just going to keep adding onto the end of it. That's why up at the top, we created it and set it equal to be nothing. We can just keep adding on to the end. We say cookie name is, and then we'll put a single quote in there to show up on the screen. Now we take the name of the first cookie. This cookie sub I, because we're looking through it, dot split. Here's the equals that we did before. And we're looking at the 0th element. That's the name of the cookie. Before we've looked at element 1, which was the value. Now we want to look at element 0, which is the name of that cookie. Now let's take this line, copy it, and paste it directly after, because we want to add on to the end. And we say, and the value is, we're going to say the value of that cookie that we just looked at. Once again, this cookie sub I dot split on the equals. We're going to look at what's in the first element of the array, which again is the cookie value. And then we're going to concatenate on the end one more little bit of a string, another single quote in there to finish that off, and a break so that there's a line in between each one. And I needed also to make sure that there was a single quote there. So you're going to see the name of the cookie in single quotes beginning here and here, and the value of the cookie in single quotes beginning here and here. And then we have a break at the end so that if we have 5 cookies, they're each going to be on a separate line. And then once we're through all this, we do one final line, which is document.get element by ID, cookie data dot inner HTML equals out message. Now that we've set up out message, we want to display it on the screen. Save our file, switch over to the browser, reload our page, and it says we have one cookie called username, and its value is Dory. And now we can come back to the script later after we've written out more cookies and see what they all are. And now we're going to write out more cookies in our next example. In this JavaScript example, we're going to use JavaScript and cookies together to keep track of how many times a user has been to this website before. From a user interface perspective, it can be handy to know if somebody has been there before, because you can present a different type of interface or show somebody only those things they haven't read or make them stand out. If you're following along in the exercise files, this is Chapter 9, Example 4, script.html. And our fairly bland web page says, how many times have you been here before? And has an H2 with an ID of page hits. As always, the heavy lifting is done inside the JavaScript file. And here's the skeleton of our page, so let's create it. Window.onload calls init page, and then the init page function is where we need to start writing. As we've done before, we want to set up expire date to be a new date. And as before, we'll set it up to be 6 months in the future. By looking at get month and adding 6 to it. Now we're going to set up a new variable called hit count. And it's going to be set to parse int cookie val. Cookie val is something we're going to be writing later on. And we're passing cookie val a value of page hit. Whatever hit count comes back with, we want to bump it up by 1. So if it came back as a 0, we want to make it 1. If it came back as 55, we want to make it 56. We don't care. We're just adding 1 to it. And this all happens when the page loads. Then we set document.cookie equal to page hit equals plus our new hit count plus path equals slash expires equals add on expire date dot to GMT string. Remember, expiration dates need to be in GMT format, and that just wrote out a cookie. Now we need to do document.get element by ID